In a previous video, we talked about the psychology of groups, but we haven't talked about applications for intergroup psychology, which contains phenomena such as prejudice and discrimination. I thought about including the textbook chapter on this topic, but ultimately decided against it because I thought the chapter was too focused on implicit biases and individual difference factors, and I wanted to focus more on normative factors. Stereotypes are the cognitive piece of the ABC model. These have to do with mental representations of social categories. We talked about this a little bit in our cognitive unit in week 2. For instance, an 80-year-old who regularly competes in organized half marathons may go against the stereotypical idea of older adults as being weak or unhealthy. Prejudice is more emotional or affective. When someone holds prejudice, it means they have a positive or negative emotional association with people based on their group membership. Discrimination is behavioral. This is when we treat people differently based on their group membership. Now, in the middle of the last century, social psychologists were very interested in understanding the roots of prejudice and discrimination. That is, why do people treat each other differently based on things like skin color or religion or sexual orientation? Why do groups have conflict? Why do these phenomena such as prejudice and discrimination exist? And so the researchers set about trying to answer these questions by first creating random meaningless groups and then adding on variables to see what would actually increase the likelihood of conflict or prejudice. One way to do this is by having participants complete a task and then be given false feedback that would place them into one of two or maybe a few different groups. In this case, psychologists would give people the opportunity to guess how many balls were inside a jar, and some people were randomly assigned to be told that they overestimated the number of balls, whereas others were told that they were underestimators. In reality, there's no real difference between these groups. The groups are random and meaningless, but people quickly formed stereotypes and exhibited biases toward those in the other group. This is known as the minimal group effect. Basically, the bias in resource allocation happens when people in one of the two groups are given a little bit of a resource, maybe it's money or tokens, and they're asked to distribute it, and people give more to members of their own group compared to the other group. People also view others in their group as more similar to them, and members of the other group as more dissimilar. People also view the others in their group as more varied and diverse, and people in the other group as more homogenous. Taken together, all of this is known as the in-group out-group bias. And again, it's important to remember that this bias that we see happened even when people were put into random and meaningless groups. I want to call back to a quote from Karen Wynn, who was featured in one of our videos about the roots of morals and ethics in children. And she said, "I think we are built to, at the drop of a hat, create us and them." In a previous video, I mentioned how people are motivated to create groups all the time. And one of the negative consequences of this is that people exhibit intergroup stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination pretty automatically. Researchers have also studied migrants or people who switch groups with the same types of experimental methods. So after researchers create random groups, they have some participants change those groups, and these are referred to as migrants, who are viewed more negatively. The migrants are viewed more negatively, possibly because they are difficult to understand or because they are treated similar to excluded or rejected individuals. Now, what are some solutions to these problems? And this is also something that psychologists have been very interested in studying and understanding over the past half century. One thing we can do is to use institutional reforms. That is, we can make laws and set social standards such that everyone must treat each other equally. We could also emphasize common goals and common threats. People are much less likely to exhibit intergroup bias and discrimination when they feel they have common interests with others in the other groups. And we can also utilize what's known as extended contact, that is, drawing large circles. So incorporating as many people into your group in some way is going to help in terms of reducing intergroup prejudice. This can be as simple as remembering that cross-group friendships exist. and that people in other groups that you may not belong to are affiliated with people in your group in some way.